The moon hung low in the inky sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the dense forest. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the ominous feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I had heard the stories, the ancient legends passed down through generations, warning of creatures that roamed these woods, creatures that were not quite human, yet not quite animal. They were called skinwalkers, and tonight I would come face to face with one. My name is Ethan, and I have always been drawn to the mysteries of the unknown. I had heard tales of skinwalkers from the local Native American tribes, whispered in hushed tones around campfires. They spoke of shapeshifters, beings who could take on the appearance of any animal they desired. But their most disturbing ability was to steal the skin, the very essence of a human. It was a dare from my friends that had brought me to these dark woods on this fateful night. They didn't believe in the legends, and neither did I, until I saw it with my own eyes. As we trudged deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around us. The forest abruptly became eerily quiet. All the animals stopped making noise like they knew something we didn't. The air grew colder, and the unease I felt grew stronger. It felt like something was watching us. We arrived at a small clearing, and that's when I first saw it. At first, it looked like a wolf, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. But as I stared, I realized there was something off. It stood upright on two legs, and its body was much too slender to be a full-grown wolf. It was a mockery of nature, a creature caught between two worlds. My heart raced. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in fear. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill like no other. It wasn't just looking at me, it was seeing through me, into the very depths of my soul. I suddenly turned around so fast, I almost pulled my back, and I ran like there was no tomorrow. I heard my friends starting to run behind me. Our panicked footsteps echoed through the forest. But the creature was relentless, always keeping pace, never too far behind. It was like a shadow, always lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. We stumbled upon an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, and without a second thought, I slammed my whole body into the door, breaking the rusted lock. I had such speed I hit the back wall of the cabin, knocking what little breath I had left out of me. My friends rushed in after me and slammed the broken door shut and frantically started barricading the door with old furniture in the cabin. The air around me was so thick I could almost taste it. The cabin was dark and smelled of rot, but it was a sanctuary for the moment. As we huddled together, we heard the sounds of the forest outside. The wind carried the echoes of strange, otherworldly howls and cries. The skinwalker was out there, taunting us, circling our refuge. We sat in complete silence for what felt like hours, and our fear only grew. We knew we couldn't stay in the cabin forever. We needed to find a way out of this nightmare. I whispered to my friends that we had to make a run for it, and they nodded, their faces pale with fear. We gathered our courage and slowly began to dismantle the barricade. The creaking of the wood sounded deafening in the stillness of the cabin. Once we had a small opening, I carefully pushed the door open, just a crack, and peeked outside. The bright moon casting an eerie glow on the clearing before the cabin. We couldn't see the skinwalker, but we knew it was out there somewhere in the darkness. With heavy breaths, we slipped out of the cabin and tiptoed into the woods, making as little noise as possible. We were like phantoms in the night, moving silently through the forest. My heart sank. The sound of my friend stepping on a branch filled me with terror. Our cover was blown. Seconds later, A blood-curdling howl echoed through the trees. It was as if the very earth shook beneath us. The skinwalker had heard us, and it was moving towards us. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. Branches and thorns clawed at us, but we didn't stop. We couldn't afford to. The forest seemed endless, and we were running out of breath and hope. By some miracle, we did not stumble and fall. Just when I thought we couldn't run any longer, we burst through the tree line and found ourselves on the edge of a cliff overlooking a churning river below. There was no way forward and no way back. The skinwalker was closing in from behind, and there was nowhere left to run. I realized we were trapped, with no escape from the nightmare that had become our reality. The skinwalker approached, its eyes fixed on us with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. We were at the mercy of a creature that had no mercy. A creature that could wear the skin of a man, but would never know the soul of one. As the skinwalker closed in, its grotesque laughter filling the air, panic surged through our veins. There was nowhere left to run, no place to hide. Our hearts pounded in our chests, and the chilling realization that this could be the end washed over us. We could see it approaching the tree line, but just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the distant sound of a car engine echoed through the night. The skinwalker's attention wavered, its head turning toward the approaching vehicle. Its sinister laughter faded as it retreated into the darkness, disappearing among the trees. Relief washed over us as the car came closer. Its headlights cut through the night like a beacon of salvation. A random person had unwittingly saved us from a fate worse than death. There was an old dirt road not too far from where we had come out of the forest. We ran down the dirt road towards the car. The driver must have spotted us because the car was slowing down. I approached the driver, and he cracked the window down a bit. The driver was understandably on edge after seeing us run towards his car, but when he saw our deep cuts from running through the forest and our panicked faces, he let us ride in his old pickup truck. As the truck drove us to safety, we glanced back at the forest, the moonlight revealing nothing but the rustling leaves and the distant howl of a lonely wolf. The skinwalker was gone. For now. I never thought I would be sharing this story with anyone, but I need to tell it. I need to get it out there, for my own sanity and for the safety of others. It happened a year ago, during a camping trip deep in the heart of the woods. My friends and I set out for a weekend of fun, completely unaware of the unspeakable terror that awaited us. Before I dive into the details, let me give you a bit of background about myself. I'm an avid camper and have spent countless nights in the wilderness. I've faced the elements, wildlife, and all manner of creepy forest noises, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. We arrived at our campsite, nestled far from civilization. The trees loomed over us, creating an almost suffocating canopy. The wind whispered secrets, and the rustling leaves seemed to hide a sinister agenda. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and settled around the crackling flames, reveling in the warmth of the fire. As the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The forest felt alive with an unnatural energy, a dark presence that I couldn't quite put my finger on. My friends brushed off my unease as jitters, but I knew deep down that it was something more. The fire started to die down, and that's when we heard it, a distant and eerie sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was like a mournful wail, a twisted blend of animal and human, echoing through the woods. I looked at my friends who now shared the same fearful expression. But we still tried to reason with ourselves, blaming it on an animal, or maybe even a trick of the wind. We decided to call it a night and retreated into our tents, but sleep eluded me. I lay there in my sleeping bag, my heart racing, the haunting sound still echoing in my mind. Hours passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for us to drop our guard. Just as I was beginning to relax a little, I heard a noise, faint but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps outside my tent, slow, deliberate, and somehow wrong. I held my breath, praying it was one of my friends. But then I heard my friend's voice from the tent next to mine, whispering to someone else, wondering if they had heard it too. A terrible realization hit me like a freight train. Whatever was outside my tent was not one of us. I slowly unzipped the tent flap, peering out into the darkness. The night was ink black, and I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was the only source of light, and it revealed a sight that will haunt me forever. A tall, gaunt figure stood just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. Its eyes glowed like burning embers in the night. It had the shape of a human, but its skin was stretched, like it was wearing a grotesque mask. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized we were not alone. This was the skinwalker. I retreated back into my tent, trembling with fear, and whispered to my friends about what I had seen. Panic set in as we realized the danger we were in. We had heard stories about skinwalkers before, but we had always thought they were just legends. The thing outside began to mimic our voices, a chilling parody of my friend's voice asking for help. It was trying to lure us out, to separate us from the safety of our tents. We refused to take the bait, clinging to each other in terror. The night seemed endless, and the skinwalker continued its sinister games, taunting us with whispers and threats. With the first light of dawn, the creature finally retreated into the shadows, and we didn't waste a moment. We packed up our campsite and hiked back to our car, never looking back. We knew that we had narrowly escaped something malevolent that night, something that could have easily ended our lives. I'm sharing this story now to warn others. Skinwalkers are not just tales told around a campfire. They are real, and they are terrifying. Be cautious when venturing into the deep woods, and always trust your instincts. I survived that night, but I will never forget the gut-wrenching fear of encountering a skinwalker in the dark heart of the forest. As I ventured deep into the dense woods on my hunting trip, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rustling leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures only added to the eerie atmosphere. My name is Jake, and despite the chill creeping down my spine, I pressed forward, my rifle gripped tightly in hand. I am an avid hunter, so the eeriness of the forest was nothing new to me. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I spotted movement ahead. A deer, its graceful form illuminated by the fading light, stood perfectly still in a small clearing. My heart quickened with excitement at the sight of potential prey. Carefully, I raised my rifle, my breath steady as I took aim through the scope. The deer seemed oblivious to my presence, its attention fixed on something in the distance. But just as I was about to take the shot, something disturbing happened. The deer's head snapped towards me with unnatural speed, its eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. Time seemed to freeze as we stared at each other, neither of us daring to move. Then, to my horror, The deer began to rise up onto its hind legs, its body contorting in ways that defied nature. My grip on my rifle tightened, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was witnessing. This was no ordinary deer. This was something else entirely. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backwards, my instincts screaming at me to flee. But before I could make a run for it, the creature let out a bone-chilling screech that echoed through the forest, freezing me in place. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I pushed back through the forest. Branches clawed at my skin, and the darkness seemed to close in all around me. But I didn't dare look back. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I burst through the trees into the clearing where my camp was set up. Gasping for breath, I quickly retrieved my car keys from my tent and continued running, leaving all my belongings behind. I sprinted for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably 15 minutes before I reached the parking lot where my car was parked. In a panic, I managed to unlock my door, my hands fumbling trying to get the key in the lock. Then I collapsed onto my steering wheel after making sure all my doors were locked. I won't lie, I started crying. My tears rolled down my cheeks like a river. I just sat there for a moment, trying to get a hold of myself. I started to question my sanity and wondered if what I had seen was even real. As I started to justify that I must have been seeing things, I rolled my window down to get some much-needed air. My car felt like a sauna after my intense meltdown. As the chilling night air crept into my car, cooling me down, I heard a gut-wrenching scream coming from the tree line. I stepped on the gas so hard that I almost ran into the ditch, and I drove the rest of the way home so fast, I thought my engine might explode. The next day, I convinced my buddy Mark to come with me to retrieve my belongings from my campsite. After walking for a while, we stumbled into the clearing where I had set up camp. The sight was haunting. It looked like a crime scene. My tent was ripped to shreds with deep claw marks, and all my belongings were scattered all around the area. I even spotted my torn sleeping bag resting on a branch high up in a tree. We both noped out of there immediately, not daring to investigate any further. It's been 3 years since the incident now. I haven't been hunting since. As I trudged through the dense underbrush of the forest, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground. My name is Adam, and I've always loved hunting. There's something primal about it, something that connects you to nature in a way nothing else can. But this trip was different. I had ventured deeper into these woods than ever before, following rumors of a massive buck that had been spotted by locals. The excitement of the hunt had me oblivious to the uneasiness slowly creeping over me. It wasn't until the sun dipped below the horizon that I realized how isolated I truly was. As darkness descended, the forest seemed to come alive with eerie noises. Twigs snapped underneath my feet, leaves rustled in the wind, and every now and then I swore I heard something moving just out of sight. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I hunkered down in a makeshift blind, waiting patiently for my prey to appear. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. Then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw it. A massive buck emerged from the trees, its antlers gleaming in the moonlight. My heart raced as I raised my rifle, taking careful aim, but before I could pull the trigger, the deer turned and bolted back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. Frustrated, I set out after it, determined not to let my prize slip away. But as I pushed deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around me. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my senses on high alert as the feeling of being watched intensified. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, but as I turned to get a better look, I froze in terror. Standing before me was not the majestic buck I had been chasing, but something far more sinister. It was a tall and thin creature, with long, gnarled limbs that seemed to stretch on forever. It had long, contorted antlers on top of its head that just seemed wrong. I can't explain it. And its eyes glowed in the darkness, fixated on me with an intensity that made my whole body freeze. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but my body refused to move. I was paralyzed with fear as the creature took a step closer. I have never felt so powerless in my life before, and in my head, I was preparing to die. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, disappearing back into the forest without a trace. I hurriedly stumbled back to my camp, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, desperate to put as much distance between myself and whatever horror lurked here in these woods. And as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly evil. To this day, I don't know what I saw in those woods, or what would have happened if the creature hadn't spared me. But one thing's for certain, I'll never venture into those woods again. And if you ever find yourself tempted to go hunting in the dead of night, remember my story and think twice before you enter the darkness alone. Like most people my age, I basically grew up on the internet. It felt like I had seen it all. It was just the same mindless content now, and it had become unbearable. A normal person would likely just have taken a break from the internet and been outside with friends, but I'm not normal. I have always been kind of an outsider. I didn't get bullied or picked on or anything like that. I just didn't like people that much. I enjoyed the freedom that came with being alone. Dark and taboo topics have always intrigued my interest, and I enjoy exploring and learning about bizarre lore. I would watch and listen to these types of stories on YouTube throughout my day, like some sort of dark, twisted podcast. It gave me a sense of calm, which sounds bizarre when these stories were so horrific. I would also dive deep into disturbing rabbit holes that would make the average person lose all faith in humanity. My favorite kind of stories were those about the dark web. I have been fascinated with the dark web for as long as I have known about its existence. A dark underground where some of the most dangerous and deranged people meet anonymously. How could I not be intrigued? Despite my curiosity, I had made myself a promise that I would never enter the dark web myself. I was smarter than that. I had heard the stories, and I knew it was dangerous. And for me, that wasn't worth the risk. But as time went by, my urge to explore the dark web only grew stronger. One faithful night, my emotions got the better of me, and I decided to explore the dark web by myself, breaking the promise I had made, a lapse in judgment that would leave a lasting scar. I took all the safety precautions I could, but in hindsight, it wasn't enough. With my heart pumping, I loaded up Tor and connected. At first I was disappointed, a bit underwhelming to say the least. Just white web pages filled with nonsensical links. So, I decided to start clicking with no goal in mind, just for the sake of exploring. After about half an hour of clicking on links that either led to nowhere or nothing interesting at all, but then I found something that piqued my interest. It was a website with an all-black background, with just one word written on it: Enter. And right under was a field that I could type into. I tried typing hello and pressed enter, because why not? Nothing happened. My text just disappeared, and I could type once again. I was expecting some sort of wrong password message or something like that, but the fact that nothing happened at all was eerily creepy, and this only intrigued me more. I decided to try some other random combinations, and after the 7th or 8th try, I decided to take a break. My stomach was killing me, so I went downstairs to my kitchen to make my delicious homemade pizza for dinner, leaving the website open on my computer. After eating, I went back upstairs and decided to watch a movie on my TV, completely forgetting about my deep web adventure. Near the end of the film, I started to hear a strange voice that didn't seem to fit any of the characters on screen. I thought my TV might have glitched, so I turned it off to see if it would fix itself. After turning it off, I waited a few seconds before turning it back on. While waiting,
Hello?
I heard the same voice again, but my TV was still off. My heart dropped. I honestly thought I was going to have a heart attack. I have never experienced such pure dread in my life before. I must have screamed without even realizing it, because the distorted voice then said,
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to scare you.
I was completely frozen. He could hear me. How? How could he hear me?
Jane.
How did he know my name? Why did it know my name? My head started spinning, and my vision became blurry, and then darkness. I woke up. I felt weird. I had this extreme feeling of primal fear running through my body. I was so confused and disorientated. What was happening? And then the terror slowly started coming back to me. My eyes snapped to my computer like a deer's in headlights. I remained completely still, analyzing my room for any noise. The distorted voice was still playing in my head. It was so deafening I couldn't tell if the voice was real or not. I was losing my mind, but I couldn't stay here completely still forever. After waiting a few minutes and convincing myself the voice was only in my head, I slowly started approaching my computer. As I was sneaking up on my PC, I peeked at my screen and saw nothing but my wallpaper. No dark web website. I was relieved. It must all have been some sort of super realistic fever dream or something. I was burning up at least. Still not completely convinced this had been a dream, I decided to check my applications folder and found that Tor was not installed. I exhaled what felt like all the air in my room, and I could finally relax a little. I sat in my chair in silence for what felt like ages, and then suddenly started uncontrollably laughing. My laughter then faded into nervous chuckles, and then complete silence once again. Hello. The last few days have been weird. Throughout my life, I have been struggling with sleep paralysis. But these happen on a somewhat rare occasion. But these last few days, I have been having an episode every single night. And it is always the same entity. A large man in a doll mask. That God-forsaken doll mask. Last night, I awoke and saw him once again. My whole body filled with dread. I lay there, paralyzed. It was a horrible experience, but at least I wasn't in any real danger. Or so I thought. My nose started itching. So I scratched it. It took me a couple of seconds of staring at the inside of my hand before I realized what I had just done. This was no sleep paralysis. I could move. Horrified, I slowly looked back up at the man, not trying to make any noise. What met my eyes will forever haunt me. Instead of pacing around my room like he had done earlier, he was now standing completely still, looking at me with those dead eyes. I became nauseous and everything started to fade. I must have blacked out again because next thing I know, I'm waking up and it's morning. I will call my doctor later. I think I might be going insane.
I did not expect my post to gain this much attention. Thank you for all the advice. I went to see the doctor, and it turns out I have been suffering from a psychosis episode due to stress. And everything I have been seeing has been hallucinations. I am on meds now, and I am doing fine. There is no need to try to contact my family. I have spoken with them, and they know I'm doing great. I have decided to take a vacation and a break from social media to help with my stress. I will come back stronger than ever. See you soon.
As I stepped out onto the snow-covered porch of my cabin, the crisp winter air nipped at my cheeks. The sun was setting behind the towering pines, casting long shadows across the pristine landscape. The only sounds were the soft crunch of snow under my boots and the distant call of a solitary bird. It was the perfect setting for a peaceful skiing vacation. I had rented this remote cabin high up in the mountains. It was supposed to be a week of relaxation and rejuvenation. Just me and the great outdoors. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. It started with small things, like the feeling of being watched or the inexplicable sense of unease that washed over me whenever I was outside after dark. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. But then, I started noticing things. There were strange tracks in the snow that didn't match any animal I knew, and odd noises would echo through the trees at night. I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind or a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, as I sat by the fire reading a book, I heard a loud thud against the side of the cabin. Startled, I jumped to my feet and peered out the window, but saw nothing. I told myself it was probably just a branch falling from a tree, but as I settled back into my chair, a feeling of dread washed over me like a wave. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from the darkness beyond the window. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there in terrified silence, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the growling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. Unable to bear the tension any longer, I mustered the courage to peek out the window. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness, their evil gaze fixed on me with unnerving intensity. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, and without a second thought I bolted for the door, my mind racing with fear. I didn't stop to grab my coat or my phone. I just ran, fueled by sheer terror and the desperate need to escape whatever lurked in the shadows. As I stumbled through the snow, my breath coming in ragged gasps, I could hear the sound of something crashing through the trees behind me, its heavy footsteps echoing through the night. I didn't dare look back. I knew whatever was chasing me was not human, and I didn't want to see it up close. I ran until my legs felt like lead and my lungs burned with exertion until I could no longer hear the sound of pursuit. And then, finally, I collapsed in a snowbank, gasping for air and shaking with fear. I don't know how long I laid there, trembling in the cold, but eventually, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a faint glow across the snowy landscape. With trembling hands, I pulled myself to my feet and staggered back to the cabin, my mind reeling with disbelief at what had just happened. I frantically packed my bags, not stopping until I was safely inside my car with the engine running. And as I drove away from that isolated cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I never used to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories were just that, stories meant to entertain and give a good scare. But now, after what I've experienced, I can't deny the existence of forces beyond our human understanding. It was a cold autumn evening when it happened. The kind of night where the wind howls through the trees and the darkness seems to swallow everything whole. I was out camping alone in the deep woods, seeking solace from the hustle and bustle of city life. Little did I know, I was about to encounter something far more terrifying than the noise of the urban jungle. I had set up my tent near a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to watch my every move. As I sat by the crackling fire, sipping on a steaming cup of coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But I brushed it off as my imagination running wild in the eerie silence of the wilderness. As the fire died down and the darkness crept closer, I retreated into my tent, zipping up the flap and huddling beneath my sleeping bag. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket, telling myself that I was safe inside my makeshift shelter. But then, I heard it. At first, it was just a faint rustling in the underbrush, like something moving through the trees. I strained my ears, listening intently, but the noise seemed to fade away as quickly as it had come. I chalked it up to the wind or a curious animal and tried to drift off to sleep. But then, it came again. This time, the rustling was accompanied by a low, guttural growl. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the sound drawing closer and closer to my tent. I wanted to scream for help, but fear had rendered me speechless, leaving me paralyzed in the darkness. And then, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I strained my ears, waiting for any sign of movement outside, but there was nothing. It was as if whatever had been lurking in the shadows had vanished into thin air. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I must have drifted off to sleep despite my terror. I awoke to the sound of birds chirping and sunlight filtering through the trees. At first, I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare, but as I emerged from my tent, I saw the evidence of something far more sinister. Deep gouges marred the bark of the trees surrounding my campsite, claw marks so large and deep that no ordinary animal could have made them. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. I had come face to face with a wendigo. I quickly packed up my belongings, my hands trembling as I worked to dismantle my campsite. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching and waiting. As I made my way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. The encounter had shaken me to my very core. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods on a cold autumn night, remember my story, and pray you never have your own encounter with whatever haunts that dark, lonely place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense forest, my friends and I trudged deeper into the wilderness. It was a routine hunting trip, something we did every year. We were seasoned outdoorsmen, armed with rifles and a sense of adventure. The woods were alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. But as we ventured further from our campsite, a strange stillness settled over the forest. The usual forest sounds fell silent, and an unsettling chill crept into the air. I glanced nervously at my friends, their faces showing concern. But we pressed on, determined to shake off the unease that had settled over us. But no matter how far we walked, the oppressive silence persisted, broken only by the sound of our very own footsteps. Then, without warning, we stumbled upon it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the fading light, a shadow cast by the dense foliage, but as I blinked and rubbed my eyes, the figure before us still remained, looming tall and menacing against the backdrop of the forest. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a towering creature with long limbs and antlers that stretched towards the sky. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, a gaze that sent shivers down my spine. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what we were facing: a wendigo. I had heard the stories growing up, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations, a creature of legend, said to stalk the forests of the north, preying on unsuspecting travelers. My heart pounded in my chest as the creature advanced towards us, its movements slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. But then, instinct kicked in. With a shout, I raised my rifle, aiming for the creature's chest. My friends followed suit, their weapons trained on the beast as it drew closer. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as we were forced to face off against the wendigo, locked in a deadly standoff. And then, with a deafening roar, the creature lunged. I fired, the shot echoing through the silent forest as the bullet struck. The wendigo stumbled, its unearthly cry reverberating throughout the trees as it fell to the ground. With a sense of disbelief, I watched as the creature thrashed and convulsed, its form twisting and contorting before my eyes. And then, suddenly, the wendigo lay still. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, catching our breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then, as if by some unspoken agreement, we all turned and fled at once, our footsteps echoing throughout the silent woods as we raced back to our campsite. So, if you ever find yourself wandering alone in the woods late at night, remember this cautionary tale, and pray that you never encounter the wendigo, for it is a creature of nightmares, and its hunger knows no bound. I could feel the cold seeping through the thin walls of my tent, creeping into my sleeping bag. The forest around me was eerily silent, not a single rustle or chirp breaking from the stillness of the cold night. It was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl, a silence that whispered of unforeseen dangers lurking just beyond. I had always loved the solitude of camping alone, the feeling of being one with nature, but tonight, that solitude felt suffocating. I tossed and turned, trying to shake off the sense of unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Just as I was about to drift off into an uneasy sleep, I heard it. At first, it was just a faint rustling, barely audible over the pounding of my heart in my ears. I froze, straining my ears to catch any hint of sound. There it was again, a soft shuffle followed by a low, guttural growl. I fumbled for my flashlight and opened my tent flap, my hands shaking. The beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the thick wall of trees all around me. For a moment, all I could see was the swaying shadows cast by the trees. Then, movement caught my eye. It was just a flicker at the edge of my vision, too quick to be anything but my imagination. But then, it happened again. A dark shape darting between the trees with unnatural speed. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized there was something out there. I wanted to scream, to run as far away from this place as possible, but fear held me rooted to my spot. I listened intently, straining my ears to hear any clue as to what was lurking just beyond my tent. The minutes stretched, each second feeling like an eternity as I waited for something, anything, to happen. And then it did. The growling grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right outside my tent. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare, but every escape route was blocked by the unknown. I huddled in the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I waited for the inevitable. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The forest was silent once more, as if whatever had been stalking me had simply vanished into thin air. I lay there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. But eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. When I awoke the next morning, the sun was shining brightly through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that it had all just been a nightmare, that the creature lurking in the darkness had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But then I saw the tracks. They were large, too large to belong to any animal I knew of, and they led straight to the edge of my tent before disappearing into the underbrush. Panic surged through me once more as I realized that whatever had been out there last night was real, all too real. I wasted no time in packing up my camp, my hands shaking as I hurriedly stuffed my belongings into my backpack. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a shiver down my spine, convinced that at any moment the creature would return to finish what it had started. But miraculously, I made it out of the woods unscathed. But the memory of that night will forever be burned into my mind. And as I sit here now, safe and sound in the comfort of my own home, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had not been so lucky. What horrors lurk in the darkness of the forest waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. So, if you ever find yourself alone in the woods at night, remember my story and pray that you are not the next one to encounter the creature from the darkness. As I ventured deeper into the dense woods, the sun's warm rays struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. It was late afternoon, and the forest was cloaked in a tranquil silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. Setting up camp had become second nature to me over the years, and I moved with practiced efficiency as I pitched my tent in a small clearing near a babbling brook. The sound of rushing water was soothing, and I welcomed its gentle melody as I worked. But as I straightened up and surveyed my surroundings more closely, a chill ran down my spine. There, just beyond the edge of the clearing, stood a massive bear. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze, my mind racing with fear. The bear seemed to sense my presence and turned its head, fixing me with a dark, piercing gaze. Its fur bristled, and a low growl rumbled from deep within its throat. I knew I was in grave danger. Every instinct within me screamed at me to flee, but I dared not move a muscle. One wrong move, and the bear would surely attack. Time seemed to stand still as we stared each other down, locked in a deadly standoff. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, the bear let out a deafening roar. its massive frame lunging forward as it charged straight for me. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and with a primal scream, I turned and bolted into the forest. Branches whipped at my face, and my lungs burned as I sprinted blindly through the undergrowth. Behind me, I could hear the thunderous footfalls of the bear, closing in with terrifying speed. I pushed myself harder, driven by pure instinct and the primal urge to survive. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, but I refused to give in to exhaustion. I had to keep running, keep fighting, or else I would surely meet my end in the jaws of that monstrous beast. At last, after what felt like an eternity of frantic flight, I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt, gasping for breath. The bear was nowhere to be seen, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that I had managed to outrun it. But then, from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, the bear emerged once again, its massive form silhouetted against the fading light of the setting sun. I was trapped, with nowhere left to run. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I faced the bear head-on, bracing myself for the worst. But to my astonishment, the bear stopped in its tracks, its fierce gaze softening as it regarded me with something akin to curiosity. For a moment, we stood there, two creatures bound by fear and uncertainty, suspended in a fragile truce. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the bear turned and lumbered back into the depths of the forest, leaving me alone in the gathering darkness. I dropped to my knees, trembling with relief and disbelief. I had survived against all odds, but the memory of that terrifying encounter will haunt me for the rest of my days. And now, as I sit here, penning these words by the dying light of my campfire, I can't help but wonder what other dangers lurk in the shadows of these ancient woods, waiting to claim their next victim. But one thing is certain. I will never forget the day I came face to face with the ultimate predator and lived to tell the tale. As an avid hiker and camper, I often find myself venturing into the depths of nature, seeking solitude and tranquility. It was on one such excursion that I stumbled upon something that forever shattered my innocence and left me shaken to my very core. The forest I decided to explore that day was dense, with towering trees blocking out most of the sunlight. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. I had been walking for hours, following a narrow trail that seemed to wind endlessly through the wilderness. As I rounded a bend in the path, my eyes fell upon a chilling sight. Across the forest floor were countless animal skeletons, arranged in a macabre display that made my skin crawl. The bones were bleached white from exposure to the elements, and there was dried blood splattered all around the area, staining the ground a dark, ominous shade of crimson. My curiosity piqued. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to investigate further. Perhaps it was foolishness that drove me forward, or perhaps it was simply morbid fascination. But I couldn't resist the urge to uncover the mystery behind this gruesome scene. As I pressed on, the dense foliage seemed to close in all around me, casting eerie shadows that danced in the flickering light filtering through the canopy above. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as a sense of evil washed over me. It wasn't long before I began to hear it. Faint whispers carried on the wind, like the distant murmurings of unseen specters. My heart began to race as I followed the sound, my senses heightened to the slightest rustle or movement in the underbrush. Then, As if materializing from the very depths of my darkest nightmares, I saw them, a group of figures cloaked in bright red robes, their faces obscured by shadow as they stood in a circle around a roaring fire. The air was thick with the scent of burning flesh, and the rhythmic chanting of the cultists made my heart stop. I froze in terror, my mind struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before my eyes. Who were these people, and what dark purpose drove them to gather in this desolate corner of the forest? Fear threatened to overwhelm me as I realized that I was intruding upon something sinister, something I should not be witnessing. Slowly, I started backing up, trying my hardest not to make a sound. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As I walked backwards the way I had come, my foot came down hard on a dry twig, snapping it with a deafening crack that reverberated through the stillness like a gunshot. The chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I dared not look back as I full sprinted back through the forest, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum as adrenaline surged through my veins. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst into the clearing where I had parked my car, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I struggled to unlock the door and clamber inside. As I peeled away from that cursed place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something ancient and forbidden, something that should never have been disturbed. So, hear my warning, dear reader, and tread carefully when venturing into the unknown. For there is evil within this world, and to encounter it is to invite madness and despair into your very soul. As I sit here recounting this story, my hands still tremble and my heart races with the memory of that night. It was just another graveyard shift at the gas station where I worked. The dull hum of the fluorescent lights filled the air, and the occasional car passing by was the only sign of life in the otherwise quiet night. I leaned against the counter, half-heartedly flipping through a magazine when I saw him. He was standing by one of the fuel pumps, his silhouette cast in the dim glow of the streetlights. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another customer needing gas in the middle of the night. But something about him seemed off. He wore a long, dark coat that billowed around him in the gentle breeze, and his face was obscured by the shadow of his hood. Then he started approaching the store. I felt a shiver run down my spine, an instinctual warning that something was wrong. I tried to push aside my unease as he entered the store, but the feeling lingered like a dark cloud overhead. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, bore into mine with an intensity that sent a chill through my bones. "Can I help you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, only continued to stare at me with those piercing eyes. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. "Sir, if you're not going to buy anything, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said, my voice trembling with fear. Still he said nothing, only turned and walked back out into the night. I breathed a sigh of relief as the door closed behind him, but the feeling of unease lingered, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to shake off the encounter and focus on my work, but every sound seemed to echo through the empty store like thunder. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent a jolt of fear coursing through my veins. Hours passed like this, each minute dragging on for an eternity. I watched the clock tick slowly towards dawn. counting down the moments until I could finally escape the suffocating grip of the night. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, he returned. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, standing by the fuel pumps once again, his hood pulled low over his face. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as he stepped into the store, his footsteps echoing loudly in the empty silence. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but I was frozen in place, unable to move as he approached the counter. This time he spoke. His voice was like a knife cutting through the silence. "I need your help," he said, his words sending a shiver down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. I could only stare at him, my mind racing with fear and confusion. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, handing it to me with a trembling hand. "Please," he said, his voice pleading. "You have to help me." I took the paper from him, my fingers shaking as I unfolded it and read the words scrawled across the page. "Help me," it read over and over again, in a frantic, looping script. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with terror. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out into the night, leaving me alone once again with my fear. I wanted to run, to call the police, to do anything to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before me. But something inside me told me that I had to help him, that I couldn't just leave him out there alone in the darkness. So I gathered up my courage and stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin as I searched for him among the shadows. And then, just when I thought I had lost him, I saw a silhouette standing on the edge of the woods. "Please," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You have to help me." I stood there for a moment, looking at him, not knowing what to do. And then, just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. I stood there in silence for a while, my heart pounding in my chest, before turning and walking back to the safety of the gas station. I finished the rest of my shift without any incident. I never saw that man ever again. As I was driving down the desolate highway, surrounded by nothing but vast stretches of darkness, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up on me. The road seemed endless, with no signs of civilization in sight for miles. The only company I had was the soft hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the dashboard lights. My name is Sarah, and I'm just an ordinary woman on an ordinary road trip. I don't usually find myself in eerie situations like this, but tonight was different. Tonight, I found myself in the midst of something inexplicable. As the fuel gauge on my dashboard dipped dangerously low, a feeling of panic began to rise within me. I scanned the desolate landscape for any signs of life, desperately searching for a gas station to save me from being stranded alone in the darkness. Finally, my eyes caught sight of a small, dilapidated building up ahead. Relief washed over me as I realized it was an old gas station. It looked abandoned, but the dim glow of the flickering neon sign above the entrance assured me that it was still operational. Pulling into the gravel lot, I parked my car beside the worn-out pumps and stepped out into the chilly night air. The wind whispered through the trees, sending shivers down my spine as I approached the rusted pump. As I reached for the nozzle to fill my tank, a sense of dread washed over me. It was as if the air itself had turned heavy with a foreboding presence. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to my own paranoia, and focused on the task at hand. But then I heard it. A faint, distant sound echoing through the darkness. It was almost inaudible at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But as it grew louder, I realized it was the sound of someone sobbing. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the empty lot for any signs of movement. But there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the night, broken only by the haunting cries of the unseen figure. Feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline, I quickly finished filling my tank and jumped back into my car, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the darkness. As I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roared to life and I peeled out of the gas station, leaving the haunting cries behind me. But as I drove away, the sense of unease still lingered in the pit of my stomach. Who was that mysterious figure? What were they doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And why did their cries sound so otherworldly? I may never know the answers to these questions, but one thing is for certain. I'll never forget the chilling encounter I had at that abandoned gas station in the dead of night. And now, as I continue on my journey, I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. But for now, all I can do is keep driving, hoping to leave the horrors of that night far behind me. Because in the end, some mysteries may be better left unsolved. Hey everyone. I need to share something that happened to me recently, and I can't shake off the unease that lingers. Let me give you some background first. I'm just an ordinary person, a 20-something-year-old trying to navigate the world of dating. So I matched with this guy, Jake, on Tinder. We chatted for a while, and he seemed nice, normal, you know. We decided to have our first date at his place, just a low-key movie date. Fast forward to that fateful night. I arrived at Jake's apartment, and everything started off fine. We ordered some takeout, picked a movie, and settled in on the couch. It was supposed to be a casual evening, but as the night went on, things took a dark turn. The movie played in the background, but I couldn't concentrate. I started noticing odd things about Jake. Like, there were weird noises coming from the other room. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just an old apartment making creaky sounds. But then I began to feel uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something was off. As I excused myself to the bathroom, I noticed Jake's demeanor change. He became more intense, his eyes fixated on me like a predator sizing up its prey. Panic set in, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe he was just awkward. Returning to the living room, I suggested we change the movie. Anything to break the tension. That's when he insisted we watch this obscure horror film he claimed to love. Now, I enjoy a good scare, but the movie he chose was beyond unsettling. It was about a person who hides a sinister secret, a secret that slowly unfolds throughout the film. As the movie played, I began to piece together the strange occurrences in Jake's apartment. The odd noises, the chilling atmosphere, it was all too real. My heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to get out of there. Then, he leaned in and whispered something that sent shivers down my spine. "I have a surprise for you in the basement." My mind screamed danger. I made up an excuse to use the restroom again, secretly messaging a friend for help. The plan was to escape discreetly, but when I returned to the living room, Jake was standing by the basement door, blocking my way out. I stammered, pretending to be unfazed, but inside, I was terrified. He opened the door, revealing a staircase leading into darkness. The atmosphere was thick with dread. I knew I had to act fast. I faked being excited, saying I needed a moment to freshen up before the surprise. As soon as I was out of sight, I grabbed my phone, texted my friend to call the police, and booked it for the door. The fear I felt that night was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I made it out unscathed, and the police arrived in time to investigate. They found nothing conclusive, just an empty basement. But I know what I felt, and I know I narrowly escaped something sinister. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a warning. Trust your instincts, and if something feels off, don't dismiss it. And remember, the scariest stories are the ones that never get told. It all began when I matched with a girl named Emily on a dating app. She seemed normal enough, with a cheerful profile picture and a bio that hinted at shared interests. We decided to meet at a cozy little coffee shop in the heart of the city for our first date. I arrived early, a little nervous but excited nonetheless. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, and I ordered my usual latte as I waited for Emily. When she walked in, I was taken aback by her beauty. She had striking blue eyes and a warm smile that put me at ease instantly. Our conversation began innocently enough, filled with small talk about our jobs and hobbies. But as the night wore on, Emily's demeanor took a strange turn. She became increasingly fixated on the topic of death, sharing unnerving details about her fascination with crime documentaries and serial killers. Attempting to steer the conversation in a lighter direction, I suggested we take a walk in a nearby park. As we strolled beneath the dimly lit street lamps, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's eyes were constantly on me, as if she were sizing me up. At one point, she abruptly stopped and asked, "Have you ever wondered what it's like to be truly alone, Alex? To be surrounded by darkness with no one to hear your cries?" My unease deepened, but I played it off with a nervous laugh, trying to convince myself that she was just into morbid topics. As we reached a secluded area of the park, Emily suggested we explore a nearby abandoned building. Against my better judgment, I agreed, thinking it might be a quirky adventure. The building was old and decrepit, with creaking floorboards and a musty smell that permeated the air. We ventured deeper into its depths, and that's when Emily's behavior took a sinister turn. She started asking invasive questions about my fears, probing for weaknesses as if she were conducting a psychological experiment. Suddenly, she revealed a small, sharp knife she had concealed in her bag. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. Emily's eyes gleamed with a twisted excitement, and I knew I had to escape. Summoning every ounce of courage, I faked a sudden stomachache and insisted on leaving. She reluctantly agreed, but as we emerged into the night, her demeanor shifted once more. It was clear that she wasn't ready to let me go. I started sprinting through the darkened street with the echo of her footsteps pursuing me like a relentless predator right behind me. Finally, I reached the safety of a crowded area, gasping for breath, as I glanced back to ensure she wasn't following. I hailed a cab and rushed home, relieved to have escaped the clutches of that nightmarish encounter. Now, as I share this story, I can't help but shudder at the memory of that first date. Emily may have faded into the shadows, but the scars from that night linger. Be cautious out there, fellow online daters. Sometimes the most beautiful people could also be the most dangerous. I've always been a night owl, preferring the solitude and darkness that wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. But one night, my obsession with nocturnal drives led me down a path that still haunts my thoughts and dreams to this day. It was a cool, moonless evening when I decided to embark on one of my late-night adventures. I'm a writer by trade, and the quiet, lonely roads often help me clear my mind and find inspiration for my work. My car, an old but dependable sedan, was my faithful companion as I drove through winding country lanes, far from the maddening crowd. As I navigated the serpentine roads, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the shadows lurking beyond my headlights held secrets I wasn't meant to discover. The woods on either side of the road seemed to be closing in, their thick branches forming gnarled, grasping fingers. With the radio playing softly in the background, I rounded a bend, and my heart nearly leaped into my throat. In the middle of the road ahead, there was a car, stopped dead in its tracks, with its headlights extinguished. Panic surged through me, and my foot slammed on the brakes, sending the car skidding to a halt. I sat there for a moment, my pulse racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Why would someone just park their car in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night? Fear gnawed at me as I watched for any signs of movement. Then, I saw them. Two figures standing by the stranded car, obscured by the darkness. Their intentions were unclear, but my instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Despite my fear, I felt compelled to help. I thought maybe they were in need of assistance. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey, do you need any help?" The two figures began to approach my car, their movements sluggish, deliberate. As they drew nearer, my anxiety worsened. Everything about this felt wrong. My body was screaming at me to get out of there, but I was frozen. And there was the possibility these people really needed help. And I did not want to leave them helpless on this lonely road. Suddenly, I noticed movement in the rearview mirror, and my heart dropped. Approaching my car from behind was a man, not just a man, but a huge man, and in his hand, he held an axe. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed my car into reverse. I hit the man behind my car and I sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. In my rearview mirror, I saw the two figures standing in the road, just watching me escape. I drove for what felt like an eternity, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of fear and relief. When I reached the safety of the nearest gas station, I pulled over and called the police with my hands trembling as I tried to calm my racing heart. The terror of that night still lingers, a stark reminder that sometimes helping a stranger in the dead of night can lead to unimaginable horror. I've shared this story now, on the internet, to warn others who might be tempted by the allure of a late-night drive. There are things that lurk in the darkness that thrive on the vulnerability of the night. My survival is a testament to quick thinking and sheer luck. But I can't shake the feeling that those figures are out there, waiting for their next victim. So, if you ever find yourself on a desolate road in the dead of night and see a car stopped in the middle of the road, don't hesitate to reverse and speed away before it's too late. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I was on my way home from a peaceful weekend at my remote cabin. The winding tree-lined roads were empty, and the tranquility of the forest surrounded me. But what should have been a relaxing journey quickly turned into a nightmare. As I drove, I noticed a car appearing in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just another traveler heading the same way. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The car stayed uncomfortably close, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. Anxiety settled in, and I decided to test my suspicion. I sped up, only to find the car mirroring my pace. My heart raced as the car continued to tailgate me, its driver seemingly hell-bent on making my journey a living nightmare. My unease grew as the car behind me began to drive more recklessly. Then, as we entered a sharp curve, the car lost control, veering off the road and crashing into a tree with a deafening crunch. My heart pounded as I watched the wrecked vehicle, but I didn't stop. Fear gripped me, and I continued driving. As I put more distance between myself and the accident, guilt began to gnaw at me. What if the driver was hurt, or worse, dying? What if they needed help, and I left them behind? The thought haunted me with every mile I put between us. Eventually, I couldn't bear the weight of my conscience any longer. I pulled over and called 911, informing them about the accident. Trembling with worry, I gave them the location and a description of the crash. I felt like I had done what was right. I had called for help, and I hoped they would reach the accident scene in time. But the guilt lingered, a reminder that in my fear, I had left someone behind in need. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone started ringing. It was the police. I nervously answered. The officer on the other end told me that they had searched the whole stretch of road where I said the accident happened and found no evidence of any car crash. I was stunned. But I saw it with my own eyes, I protested. The officer's voice remained stern as she explained that they had sent a patrol to the location I described, but there was no sign of an accident or any wrecked car. I hung up the phone in bewilderment. How could the car not be there? Was I losing my mind? The incident had been so vivid, so real. I couldn't fathom how it could all just disappear without a trace. To this day, I have not found a plausible explanation for the bizarre incident. It remains a haunting mystery, a chilling encounter that defies reason and logic, leaving me with a deep sense of unease every time I think back on that fateful evening.